Hey guys, this is Pastor Mike. So, as I understand it, Sunday's message did not have audio online. So, I thought I'd take a moment just to kind of re-record the message from this last week, mostly because we're going through a survey of the Old Testament, and I want to make sure everybody's kind of getting the bits and pieces as we're making our way through the journey. So, I want you to imagine that it's springtime. It's been a super nice day. You've spent most of the day outside, doing some fun stuff, maybe some yard things to get ready for the summer. But in the evening, the storm rolls in, the front is pushing in cold air, and that night you hear the siren go off. You know what I'm talking about, right? The tornado warning. When that happens, where do you run for shelter? Well, for me and my family, we would go to the lower level on our house. It's our basement. But growing up in Missouri, we had a lot of tornadoes. A lot of tornado warnings, but no basement. What did we have? Well, we had a cave. The cave was, it was dark, it was musty. It was a home to lots of insects and spiders, and the occasional snake is where we put the canned goods at. But when a storm would roll in, to the cave we would go. We would be packing our battery-powered flashlight and our battery-powered radio. So we could keep up on all of the news and happenings. Now, I get it, like we're Midwesterners, oftentimes we just go out and watch. But the truth of the matter is, we need a safe place to go when things get real, right? And the same is true in life. When things get difficult, when everything's falling apart, where is it that you run to for shelter? We have a church planter friend, Willie Tryon, who is in Hastings, and on his arms are tattooed the words "safe place." Now, maybe it gives his kids some comfort, but I can tell you that that's probably not the place that I'd want to run to for comfort. Sorry, Willie, if you're watching. But I need something a little bit more, maybe secure than that. I want to share with you guys that I think that's something that I needed when I was new to the faith. Right when I first started attending a church service, I realized that the people there, and they cared about me. I was kind of welcomed into their family, and that meant a whole lot. And so that's really what I want for us here at Connection, that we could be a place that others could find shelter, that they could find, the church word is sanctuary. They could find a place to rest and to know that everything is going to be okay. And that really takes the people, right? We as people have to be more welcoming and inviting of people from all sorts of backgrounds and struggles, so that this is a safe place where they can encounter a Jesus who loves and encourages them and is going to challenge them to step it up in their walk with him, in their dedication. It's not an easy place to be, but at Connection we can do that. So as we wrap up our study of Joshua, we're in the last 8 chapters, really, and we kind of kicked out the first one last week, but chapters 18 through 21, we're really seeing like the land is still being allotted to the different tribes of Israel. Israel's other name was Jacob. We saw that in Genesis. But as the land is being divvied out, there's 7 tribes that still need to get their allotments, and so that's taken place. But we also see a group of people, one of the tribes, Levi, that does not get an allotment of land, at least, because their allotment is that of the priesthood. Now, they were the mediators between God and man, but they also took care of all things tabernacle, or mobile church, if you will. And so this group of people, like even though they didn't have land, they actually were given cities, 48 cities spread throughout the entire area. And among those 48 cities were 6 cities that were cities of refuge. The cities of refuge are talked about in chapter 21, and it gives us a little indication about what has taken place. Well, 22 rather is where we see this taking place, verses 1 through 6. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Say to the people of Israel, appoint the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you throughout Moses." And we can go back to Deuteronomy 4, Deuteronomy 19, and get a little bit more about this. And the purpose is that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowingly may flee there. Then they shall be for you a refuge from the avenger of blood. Well, Deuteronomy 19 kind of unpacks this a little bit for us. And we can see that if you're out chopping wood and the axe head falls off, breaks off, and it strikes somebody and they lose their life, well, family members they're going to be out for blood, right? But you didn't intend it to be bad. You didn't intend to kill this person. You could run to the cities of refuge and plead your case there. And so for accidental killings, this would definitely be a place where this would take hold. Let's continue to read. He shall flee to one of these cities and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city and explain his case to the elders of that city. Then they shall take him into the city and give him a place, and he shall remain with them. And if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not give up the manslayer into his hands, because he struck his neighbor unknowingly and did not hate him in the past. And he shall remain in that city until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who is the high priest at that time. Then the manslayer may return to his own town and to his own home and to the town from which he fled. And so this whole idea really of being able to flee and run, it comes with, well, some checks and balances. First, you needed to plead your case before the elders. Then they would give you a place to stay. Some commentaries say as many as like 25% of the homes inside of these cities would be designated for these kind of refugees, right, that are seeking some sort of salvation. Well, you stay there until you put on trial before the people, right? And if you're found guilty, well, then you're turned over to the family, the avenger of blood, right? Because you have taken a life. Apart from that, though, like if you're found innocent, you can still live in that city and you stay there until the high priest would die. Something magical would happen whenever the person who had the highest place in the priesthood would die, that would make an atonement that would pay for the punishment of other people. And isn't it interesting that the author of Hebrews talks about Jesus being the great high priest who dies for the sins of the people? And this is a definite foreshadowing of what Jesus would accomplish years later when this is taking place. They would, included in all of this, they would understand that they were to make the way as easy as possible for other people to get into the cities of refuge. There was less than 30 miles between them. There had to be a road. It was supposed to be twice as wide as most of the roads they were on, smooth, so there was no reason that they couldn't get there. It was a day's journey, easy passage, and they needed to do whatever they could to provide an out. And maybe you're familiar with it. Exodus chapter 20, Deuteronomy chapter 5, do not murder. We know that was one of the commandments that they really clung to and they needed to hold on to. There was also the Old Testament law, like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And sometimes this gets taken out of context. It was actually meant to be a limiter. If you took a life, there wasn't any more that someone was supposed to do to you than to take your life, right? If you lost a limb, you can only take a limb. Don't go overboard with your punishments within the society. That was kind of the concept here. But those cities of refuge hold an important piece, and just understand that was in the allotment given to Levi, and they were to take care of that. In chapter 22, we began to see some other things take place, and really the time of peace that would come through. Really, let's read the end of chapter 22, or 21 rather, and then the beginning of chapter 22. Chapter 21, verse 43. Then the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of their enemies had withstood them. For the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. Everything that God said he would do, he's done. Right? The land had rest. There was no more war. This is a great time for Israel. So now what? What are they supposed to do next? Well, we get a taste of this in the next few verses. So chapter 22, verse 1. At that time Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and he said to them, you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded you, and have obeyed my voice and all that I have commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, down to this day, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers, as he promised them. Therefore, turn and go to the tents in the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. So you finished, you've been faithful, you can go, right? You can go to the place that God has prepared for you, that he's promised you, that I have allotted to you. Verse 5, though, only be careful. Be careful, right? You're free to go, but be careful. Why? They need to observe the commandments and the laws of Moses, and to love God, to walk in his ways, to keep all of his commandments, that it would be well with them. Right? This is the same thing we've been hearing over and over as we've studied through the Old Testament. Right? There's blessings and curses. If you follow God, he will give you the blessings. If you rebel against him, you will get the curses. So you fought the war. You've got the land. Go to the land, but keep the promises. So many times it's easy for us. We come out with a great victory. We've just accomplished something we've been working so hard to, and we take our foot off the gas and we let up and we get comfortable. We kind of settle into complacency and we're not really pushing the direction that we need to go. And sometimes that can happen in our faith. We come in because some traumatic thing is happening in our life. But as soon as that problem goes away, we kind of just get complacent. We kind of settle in, and the Lord that we were so eager to serve beforehand just to find a solution, well, he kind of gets forgotten. And we kick back into our old ruts, our old way of doing things, or even into some of the new obstacles and challenges, all because we're not holding on to God. In chapter 23, we see Joshua coming to the end of his life. And so he gathers in some of the leaders of the Israelites and he begins to speak to them about what's next. And he says, you know what, I'm old and well advanced in years. You have seen all that the Lord has done to all of these nations for your sake, for it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. Right? You've seen everything that God has done. Behold, I have allotted to you the land as an inheritance. Therefore, be strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, right? That you may not mix with the nations that are remaining here. And I think it's important that we understand that it was the same command, the same commission that he gave in chapter 22 to those on the other side of the Jordan. Now, the ones that are on his side, hey, you've got the land, stay faithful. You've seen everything that God has done before. Don't mix with all these people that were here before you. I mean, we're coming in to punish these people, to eradicate them from the land, not to mix with them. And so, be strong. Verse 8, cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done to this day. For the Lord has driven out before you great and strong nations. And as for you, no man has been able to stand before you to this day. One man of you puts to fight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you. Right? When we take God into battle, one with God is better than 1,000 without God. But be careful, be strong, and be careful. Be careful to love the Lord your God. Right? For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining among you, and you make marriages with them, and so that you associate with them and they with you, know for certain that the Lord will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare, a trap, a whip, thorns in your eyes, until you perish off this land. Right? Be strong. Stay faithful to God. Be strong not to mix. Be careful not to mix. Right? God is with you. You can do great things. But if you mix, if you allow an infection to fester and to grow, then God's not going to be with you. And you will perish. And these people, they'll be a pain in your rear end. Man, this does not sound like something you'd want to do, but this is the warning given to the Israelites as they settle into the promised land. Like, you can settle, but don't settle. You know what I'm saying? You can settle, but don't settle. You can live here, but don't give in here. You need to stay faithful to God. He goes on to say in verse 14, and now I'm about to go the way of all the earth. And you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one word has failed of all the things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you. Not one of them has failed. But just as the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things until he has destroyed you from off this good land that he's given to you. God has done everything that God said he was going to do. He's faithful. But don't forget, God also said if you don't follow him, he will punish you. He will curse you. So remember, right now, God has done everything. Look at all that God has done. Be strong. Be careful. Because God will also do what God said he will do if you abandon him. Man, we need to hear that, don't we? We don't want to hear that, but we need to hear that God is faithful. But God is not only faithful to bless us, he's also faithful to remove his blessing from us. And that can be a challenging place. And so he talks to the leaders in chapter 23. He talks to the people in 24, and amongst them are, again, the leaders. And this is interesting because it's a long time ago, verse 2, your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, right? This is the name of a river. If you go back to Genesis and the story of creation, you see that the Garden of Eden was there by the Euphrates, right? We also see into the future the area of Babylon and later on Assyria is also in this land, but this is where Abraham and his dad were at before God led them out, right, towards the land of Canaan. And at the land of Canaan, we see that God is doing something pretty tremendous because it's also going back to Genesis. And we see in Genesis chapter 6 through 9 that Noah has a son named Ham who disrespects his father and gets punished, and that ends up being the Canaanites, right? So all of this is going back to that area as well. And then we see the names of some of the other faithful people there in Genesis, whether that be Jacob or Esau, Isaac even, and then the time where God led them through Joseph down to Egypt, but then delivered them back out of Egypt and out of slavery through Moses, how he parted the Red Sea, provided darkness to separate the enemy from the Israelites. And it goes on to talk about how even like the houses that they live in, but they didn't build, the land that they're able to partake of the fruit of the land, but they didn't plant anything. All of this stuff that they have is there because God gave it to them. Man, this is the attitude we need to kind of bring to things too, isn't it? Like everything that we have, all that we've done or accomplished, like it doesn't have anything to do with us and what we've done, but it has absolutely everything to do with what opportunities God has given to us. And so we need to remain faithful to God as a result. And verse 14 then goes on to say a very powerful word, therefore. Therefore, okay, so God has been faithful. God has given us all the blessings. God has provided all of the victories. God has delivered on every single promise, and everything that we have, he is blessed us with, not our own account. Therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. God has been faithful, so we need to serve him faithfully, love him and serve him. And he issues a challenge. Joshua is about to die, and he issues a challenge to the Israelites, God's chosen people. He says, you need to decide who you're going to serve, right? Because Abraham's family, they worshiped many other gods. Egypt, they worshiped many other gods. The land of Canaan, the Canaanites, worshiped many other gods. But you need to worship me. Choose to worship the one true God. He goes on to say, like, that's my choice, right? As for me and my household, we've chosen to serve the Lord. So what's your decision? Right? You're going to serve the gods of your fathers? You're going to serve the gods of this country? Choose wisely. Their response in verse 16 is, far be it from us. Like, you've already laid the case out. Why would we choose anybody else? We're going to serve the Lord. And then the passage that stood out to me probably the most throughout this whole section is found in verse 19. Right? He just says to the people, you're not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God, and he will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. Right? Pick who you're going to serve. Oh, we serve God. You can't serve God. What do you mean, Joshua? You just asked me who I was going to serve, and you're telling me I can't serve him? Well, they doubled down and they said, no, we're going to serve God. And his response to them in verse 23 is, then put away your foreign gods that are among you and incline your heart to the God of Israel. Now, this would be easy, right, for us to look at them and go, okay, so they're coming from these foreign lands and they worship these foreign gods and they didn't get to see all of the things that were going on there. Right? Or maybe they saw the power of God, and we would go, man, I've seen God part waters, and I've seen him defeat enemies and drop walls, and this is all amazing. Look at all the things God has done. Who are these guys over here worshiping? They got these little pocket idols. They're praying over here to statues of gold or wood or whatever. Man, we don't do that, but we do. Right? There are so many different things in America that we worship. Right? We worship monetary gain, stuff, right? We worship entertainment. We even worship our families, right? We know that we worship them because we actually elevate them to a position that is equal to or greater than the God of the Bible, the God of Israel. Right? We filter our decisions there. We make sure that our financial decisions are congruent with that set of values that we've stepped into. And we bring to the table lots of other gods. But the command is there. The question is there. Right? When we step into it, who do we really serve? Is it God? Because it's going to be more than just attending church on occasion or throwing a name on a shirt or a sticker on a car. Right? It's going to cost you. And you're going to have to sacrifice some of the other things in your life. And all of those other idols, right? Have no other gods before me. Make no graven images of the Ten Commandments. Right? We need to put those into practice. If you want to serve, then suit up and get rid of the idols. Let's go. Right? You can settle in, but don't settle in. God's got a lot more for you. So to help you process all of this, I've come up with 3 key questions that I think are beneficial for us to process. The first question is, where do you turn for refuge? When times get tough, when things get difficult, where do you go to? And question 2 is, who do you serve? Right? Who are you serving in life? What are some of the things for you that are mandating your time, your attention? They're governing your choices. Where do you turn for refuge? Who are you serving? And what are you willing to do to make the way straight for others so that they can see and seek refuge in Jesus? That's something that we need to be able to do. I also found it interesting this week diving into the New Testament. Whether you go to the book of Romans or Galatians, as I'm about to take you to, in Galatians chapter 3, we can see all of these pieces, this one strand kind of being pulled and the symmetry across, whether it's from Genesis or now in Joshua or years later, as Paul is writing this letter to the church in Galatia, we see that there is the idea of the law. And he says that there's 430 years between the promise that God gave to Abraham, verse 17, and the law that was given to Moses. And the law does not save us because the promise came before it. So what does the law do? Well, again, whether it's here or in Romans, you see that the law was actually given so that we would see just what it took to be right with God. The problem is the law points out all the ways that we don't measure up, all the ways that we're not good enough. And so the law could never be good enough to save us. It was actually just a placeholder until Jesus arrived on the scene, the one who the promise is about. Let's read that here together. This is what I mean. The law which came 430 years afterward, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God, so as to make the promise void. For if the inheritance comes by the law, it is no longer comes by the promise, but God gave it to Abraham by a promise. Why then the law? It was added because of transgressions, until your offspring should come to whom the promise has been made. And it was put into place through the angels by an intermediary. Now that an intermediary applies more than one, but God is one. Right? This offspring, if we go just a few verses before, it's talking about Jesus. All the way back in Abraham's time, God's making a promise of Jesus yet to come. In verse 22, the scripture imprisoned everything under sin, so that by the promise of faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. Right? For all of us who believe, we're children of the promise. We have a place of refuge in Jesus Christ. The great high priest has made atonement for us. And it's not based upon our innocence or our guilt, right? Because we're all guilty. We've all fallen short. But in Jesus, we find hope and a second chance, a place of refuge. So I'd ask you again, where do you turn to for refuge? What God is it that you're serving? And what are you doing to make it a little bit easier for others to find refuge in Christ?